Okay, so for today's session, we will actually be looking into infosecurity objectives. There are commonly three objectives: confidentiality, integrity, and availability, often known as the CIA triad. So today's session would actually be suitable for someone who is looking to sit the ISC2 Certified in Cybersecurity exam or the CompTIA Security Plus exam. I'm Benjamin, and today I'll be bringing you through this content. So when we look at the concepts involved, there are often three objectives that we would like to achieve. The first of which is confidentiality, which is what most people associate with information security. When we think about confidentiality, we think about information such as our date of birth, our phone number, or our email address, which we might want to keep private and not known to the world at large. But information security is more than just confidentiality. For the concept of integrity, we look at your bank balance. For example, when we wake up in the morning, we will expect that our bank balance has not changed from what it was last night. And I believe most people will not be happy if they had a lower bank balance compared to what they believe it should be. And lastly, the concept of availability. So this is something that it's a bit harder to associate with information security. But if that information is not available to you and you are unable to access it, then a breach of that of information security has occurred. Okay, now let's step through some questions to test our understanding of these three concepts. So for question 1, an organization has encrypted all customer records stored in its database to prevent unauthorized access. And the question is asking which security principle is being addressed most directly. So there are a few concepts that we have to understand here. Okay, so the first concept that we have to understand here is encryption. So what would be encryption? Encryption is the transformation of data so that it is from something that is understandable by a human being to something that is not understandable if you don't have the correct encryption key to actually convert it back into something that a human being can understand. So if we look at encryption, for example, we could have a particular Gmail address probably, and someone else maybe with let's say it's a Yahoo address. And if these addresses are encrypted, what would happen would be it would actually be translated into a bunch of gibberish here, and without the key you would actually be unable to decrypt or be able to understand what is being actually saved in here. So if we come back to the question, another keyword here we have to look at is access. And access, when you see this keyword here, it is often associated with the principle of confidentiality. And why is that so? Because as we mentioned earlier, confidentiality is about not giving someone access to your confidential information such as your phone number and your email address. And if someone is able to access it, then confidentiality would be breached. And how does this factor into this question here is when the records are actually encrypted, someone cannot easily discern what is your actual email address. And so, we have preserved confidentiality through the use of encryption. And why is it not integrity? So whenever we look at integrity, we are not thinking about the keyword access, we are thinking about the keyword modification. If we can come back again to our earlier example, where our bank account balance got changed or modified to the number when we woke up in the morning, and that's something that is not pleasant. And so whenever there's a modification of something, that would be a breach of integrity. And finally, availability is about the inability to access. So it's not unauthorized access. It's not being able to access that information. And so it doesn't apply in this question here. And so for this question, the answer should be an A for confidentiality. Okay, moving on to the second question. A file integrity monitoring system alerts administrators when critical system files are modified without authorization. Which CIA triad principle does this control primarily support? And so we have actually talked about this briefly in the previous question. So when there's modification involved, it's often integrity. So the integrity has been compromised because the file was modified without authorization. And what happens in this file monitoring system is, they're monitoring all these critical system files, and if something writes to the file, changes the file, it will actually be alert. The administrators will be alerted. It's kind of how your bank balance gets modified, and it would actually trigger an alert that there was unauthorized modification that didn't happen through, let's say, a normal bank transfer or something like that. Your bank balance just got changed, and that would trigger an alert. And so for this question, we'll actually be looking at B. Okay, moving on to the next question. A company implements redundant power supplies and automatic failovers for its web servers. What is the primary security objective of this control? Okay, so now we are looking at redundant power supplies and automatic failovers. So what are these? So redundant power supplies, basically you have your primary power supply, and you have probably your secondary power supply. And if, let's say, there's a outage, there's a cut in the primary power supply, the secondary power supply can actually supply to the web server itself. And so what this achieves is the fact that the web servers do not go offline, or they do not shut down because of the lack of power. And so you're still available, you're still able to access that information, and that information is available. So this is something that we look at. This is something that feeds into the concept of availability over here. And automatic failovers, what does it mean again? So now we have multiple web servers again. So probably we have the primary web servers and the secondary web servers, and these are serving traffic. So this could be for example, you have a computer here who's accessing, retrieving certain information, and it's returning that information. And if for some reason there's an error over here, and this fails to recover from the error and it goes offline, it will automatically fail over to a secondary, and your computer will automatically be able to access this instead of the primary web server. And again, this feeds into availability. So whenever we have something such as we have redundant either power supplies or servers, or we have automatic failovers, so it switches over to a secondary, a backup, it often leads to the objective of availability. Yeah. Okay, looking at the next question. Which of these following situations represents a violation of integrity? Okay, when we look at this, we look at the first answer itself. An attacker intercepts encrypted network traffic. So again, we look at the concept of encryption, and this was where we looked at in the first answer. It actually fits into confidentiality, and so this is not integrity. We are looking for integrity. Okay, a user is unable to access a system due to a DDoS attack. Again, unable to access a system. So this is something that we've just looked at in the previous answer itself. So this is availability. A database record is altered without proper authorization. Okay, so now altered, and altered is a synonym for the word modification. And so this is the answer that we are looking for integrity. Okay, so the answer D, a private key is stored in a hardware security module. It's not really relevant to what we are looking at here. Okay, let's look at the next question. A system administrator applies digital signatures to software updates before deployment. Which security principle is most supported by this action? So to answer this question, we will actually have to understand the concept of digital signatures. And a digital signature is not much different from an analog signature, or a signature that you use a pen to a paper document. And what a signature provides is actually the fact that the person who has signed the document has actually approved of the contents of the document. So if we look at that, does it affect confidentiality? I would argue that there is no impact to confidentiality. After a document has been signed, anybody can still read the full contents of the document. So it doesn't actually change anything about confidentiality, and this would not be the answer. But is integrity the answer then? So normally when we fill out a document, we do it in pen, and we would actually sign it at the bottom of the document. And if there are any modifications to be made to the document, we made an error somewhere, we would actually cancel it out, and we were supposed to countersign by the error to prove that the modification was done by you. And so I would argue that a digital signature actually promotes integrity, because we ensure that after a person has actually filled out the document in pen and signed below it, it has not been modified, because a pen cannot be erased, and any modification would have to be countersigned. So integrity is one of the main factors that that a digital signature helps to contribute towards. And lastly, is availability affected by a digital signature? There's no actually correlation or link here. We are not making a backup copy, a second copy of the document, so that if the first one is impacted for some reason, we still have a backup copy. That would probably feed into availability, but there's no mention about it in this question. It's just simply digital signatures. So the answer here would be B. Okay, moving on, question 6. Which control best helps ensure availability during a ransomware attack? And so we are talking about availability again, and as we have looked at previous examples, we are looking at backups, we are looking at redundancies. Okay, does a strong password policy actually help ensure availability? I would guess not really. This would probably feed in more into confidentiality, because with a strong password, someone cannot brute force or guess your password and would not be able to access that information. Regular offline backups, yes, definitely. This is something that we have looked into. Okay, let's examine some of the other options as well. Database encryption. So encryption again, it's mutating the attributes, changing the attributes so that you cannot just directly read off the attributes. So I would argue that this is again confidentiality, so that if the database is somehow if someone managed to access the database, they can't immediately read off all the data. And lastly, role-based access control, which is something that we'll cover in a subsequent session. Okay, moving on to question 7. An organization enforces access control so that only HR staff can view employee salary information. Which CIA triad principle is being enforced here? And so what we are looking at is only HR staff can view employee salary information. So only the relevant people who need that information can access it. And the keyword here again is view or access, in other words. I believe you might already know which answer this tends towards. So viewing and accessing information, we are always talking about confidentiality. So why does this actually matter is because we want to make sure that only those that are authorized, the HR staff can view salary information. It's not anybody in the company who can view it, and so we maintain confidentiality in that manner. Is integrity affected here? I would say not really, because again the keyword here is view. If the question was if an organization enforces the controls so that only a HR staff can actually change or modify an employee salary, then perhaps we would look at integrity and availability. Again, it's not a concern here. Okay, moving on to the next question. A web application uses checksums to verify that downloaded files have not been altered in transit. What is the primary goal of the mechanisms? So again, for checksums, it will be really good if we can understand how checksums work. But I believe at a basic level, since this is really catered for the basics, we look at the keyword here, altered. And altered, the synonym of altered would be modified again. And when we talk about modified, we are again talking about integrity over here. So we are making sure that the downloaded files have not been modified in transit. Someone has not replaced your file with something that is possibly malicious, and so what we are looking at is ensure that the integrity of what we downloaded. Confidentiality again not really in play here, because if someone is able to if someone is able to actually alter the file in transit, they will probably be able to access it as well. So since the keyword here is altered, it's not viewed, someone is not able to view the file in transit or access the file in transit, then we are not looking at confidentiality, but integrity instead. And availability. So in this in this question itself, if the question stated that to ensure that we are still able to download the files and we are not prevented from downloading the files, then that could be something that's availability here, if you are getting prevented from doing it. But no, that's not the question. So the answer is B, integrity. Okay, moving on to question 9. Which scenario best demonstrates a trade-off between availability and confidentiality? Okay, so this question I would say is slightly more complex. We are talking about a trade-off here. Okay, so when we look at encrypting sensitive data at rest, we are promoting confidentiality over here because we are encrypting again. Okay, is there a trade-off? Maybe not. Okay. When we look at the second one, requiring multi-factor authentication for remote access, I would argue that again this is promoting confidentiality, because if we require multi-factor authentication or MFA, we are requiring people to verify that verify their identity to make sure that it's someone that is authorized to access the information. Taking a system offline to apply emergency security patches. Okay, I believe this option might show some sort of trade-off here. Okay, so firstly, taking a system offline. So as we have discussed, when we bring something offline, we are affecting availability here. So availability is actually here, and availability is actually decreased because we are unable to access the information. But the second part of the answer says to apply emergency security patches. And so what does security patches do? They patch up vulnerabilities so that the attackers are unable to exploit this system and be able to access the information. So actually in this context, what will happen is that confidentiality will actually be improved here, because now we are patching the system and attackers cannot access the system as easily anymore. And so there is a trade-off here now. We are taking a hit to availability to increase confidentiality here. And so the answer for this would be C. And okay, our final question. An organization implements a disaster recovery plan that includes geographically dispersed data centers. Which CIA triad principle does this most directly support? Okay, so we are talking about a disaster recovery plan here, which says that in the event of a particular disaster, do we have backups? Do we have redundancies? Again, it's always this same few words, and if you are able to really identify these few words, these questions will be really a lot more simpler to tackle. And we are looking at geographically dispersed data centers, and basically what this means is we have data centers located at various places in the world, so that if there's a particular natural disaster such as an earthquake, possibly it will not be affecting all the data centers, and we will still have some data centers that are still online and able to support the requests. Okay, so is confidentiality affected here? No, not really. Integrity, again, we are not actually ensuring the integrity. We are just making multiple copies of the same file, and that file could have been modified, and we have no way of knowing. And finally we come to the answer of availability, which is C. And definitely availability is being increased when we have a disaster recovery plan, because we now have backups, we now have redundancies, and in the event of a natural disaster, we will still be able to access that information, because there are additional data centers and all to support that. Okay, so that's all for today's session, and I hope this has been useful to you, and in future we will definitely have more sessions covering more complex topics. So stay tuned. Thank you.